Good Tuesday evening, folks. We are about 30 hours or so away, depending on when you watch this video, from Milton making landfall in Florida, along the west coast near Tampa Bay, Florida. Now, today it did regain its Category 5 status. It did briefly weaken last night after an eye wall replacement cycle, but now it is right back up to a Category 5. So here's the latest headlines on Milton. It briefly weakened, as I mentioned, thanks to an eye wall replacement cycle. And we most likely will see another one of these occur. So that could happen in the next 12 hours, and that could begin a weakening trend as it leads up to landfall. But between now and, say, the next 8 hours, the window of opportunity is still open. Favorable conditions may permit that we revisit the peak intensity, which occurred yesterday, 180-mile-per-hour winds, minimal pressure of 897. And that growing wind field, as the storm will start to weaken and gain latitude, the wind field will begin to broaden. And that means more people will be impacted by the storm surge, as well as the gusty, damaging wind threat that certainly is present with this system. Let's start off here on satellite imagery, as we normally do with this video, these updates. This is infrared satellite imagery, and this thing is looking extremely healthy. This is a several-hour loop, and you can see it's really maintained its overall structure, a very well-defined small eye. It's a little larger than yesterday. Yesterday's pinhole eye, of course, led to that eye wall replacement cycle, and it was replaced with a larger eye. But winds of the update of 8 o'clock, 165-mile-per-hour winds with gusts to 200. Pressure has dropped again. It did recover up into the 920s earlier today, but now it has fallen considerably down in the low 900s, 902 millibars at this time. Again, the lowest was 897. So we are at a Category 5. And if you're wondering, what are the strongest storms ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin? Well, we go off of two records, the strongest wind speed and then the lowest central pressure. So in terms of wind speed here, Milton is not on the board. 180-mile-per-hour winds was its peak, so it's just below top 5. But you see Wilma there was at 185. The strongest ever, 1980, Allen had wind sustained of 190 miles per hour. And then when we go to central pressure, lowest pressure was 882 millibars found in Wilma in 2005. And look at that. Milton climbs to the number 5 strongest Atlantic hurricanes in terms of minimal central pressure. That got down to 897 yesterday. So where is it going from here? Brand new track update as of 5 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. It does maintain a Category 5 probably the next 12 hours, and then it will begin a slow trend downwards in terms of intensity. But as I mentioned, it doesn't mean that the impacts will be any less threatening. Okay, the wind field will be broader. A larger area of the west Gulf Coast of Florida will be impacted. At landfall late tomorrow night, late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, we're looking likely of a Category 3 major hurricane making landfall somewhere between Clearwater and Fort Myers. That's the size of the cone at this point in time. It is smaller as consensus grows and we get closer to the time frame. It's not as wide as it is out off the east coast of Florida, but it does hone in on the central west coast of Florida. 125-mile-per-hour winds at this point. Keep in mind the center of Milton can track anywhere within this cone, and even that only occurs 2/3 of the time. But it's most likely going to stay in here with the increased guidance and just the better computer modeling that we have. Now, this is important for you to remember here if you are in the forecast cone or you are in the impact zone of Milton. This is a schedule of the advisories that are released from the National Hurricane Center. 8 of them come a day, 4 full advisories, 4 intermediate. Now, the cone updates, the change in any track, will come at 5 and 11, 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m. In between there, we're going to get updates on its strength and its location, and that's what we're going to go off of for this report at 8 p.m. We get an 11 p.m. update. Now, as we do get closer to landfall, likely happening late tomorrow night, we'll begin to see the Hurricane Center issue hourly updates right up and post-landfall. Let's switch things up now and visit visible satellite imagery. And this is high-resolution imagery here, and just look at this expanse of cloud deck here from Milton. And as it plays out, notice how the eye that was going through the eye wall replacement cycle begins to warm and clear out. And as we zoom in on this, this is what's fascinating about intense tropical systems like this. We get the stadium effect here, and if you look closely, I'll let it rewind and go back, you can see little spins inside the eye. Those are called mesovortices, and that is a signature of an extremely intense hurricane. And if you look at the last couple of images here, you can actually see straight down to the surface of the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, right in there, as the satellite peers right on through it. It's cleared out enough. Just amazing. We have had aircraft flying through this pretty consistently to give us updated data on the status of the system, and all of that data gets put into the computer model. So each run, it gets a little bit more accurate in terms of where it's going to go. But look at the most recent run from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft, clocked a wind speed of 204 miles per hour. Pair that with a minimal central pressure at 902, which is what it's at as of the 8 o'clock advisory. So they'll continue missions into the storm right up to landfall and even after that, as well as it re-enters the southwest Atlantic. I want to play out the 24-hour loop of the infrared here because you can see when the eye wall replacement cycle occurred. Last night when we talked, we were at peak intensity. Here we are right here. And then notice how the eye disappears. There's a bit of a wobble, and then it regains, a larger eye takes its place, and now it is just powering through. Also, something to note here is that in the last 24 hours, it's pretty much been on an east trajectory. Pretty slow pace, too, under 10 miles per hour. Now it's picked up a northerly component to it. So now it's begun its trend to the north and east that'll eventually take it to the west coast of Florida within 30 hours from now. And it has picked up slightly. It's at 10 miles per hour now. Last update, it was at 8. So everything continues to remain favorable for additional development or intensification under the hood. Okay, at the surface of the ocean, we still have the very warm water in the upper 80s, so that's no issue there. Heat energy is plentiful. It's also heading in a direction of a loop current, and that is warm water coming on up from the Caribbean, looping around and then heading towards the Florida Straits. This is not only very warm water, but very deep water, and that's important for intense tropical systems. They mix up the water, something called upwelling. So when you're mixing up water, you typically pull up cooler waters from a depth. Not the case that's going to be happening here when it goes on through. We've got deep, warm water, endless amounts of energy for this. So if all else was to play in, if we still had favorable mid and upper level dynamics going on, this could easily overperform what it did for its peak yesterday. But since we're going to see an increase in wind shear, that will likely limit it taking full advantage of what's lying ahead here in terms of endless heat energy. I want to show you mid-level moisture now. This is the water vapor imagery on satellite. Still have a moist profile in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. You need that for a tropical system. But take note of what's lurking here off to the north and west. We like to see that. Not only is there dry air, there's an increase in wind shear. These are winds at 35,000 feet. They are screaming in out of the west. Now, eventually, that will work on the system to help tilt it. That will kick off a weakening trend up to landfall. So that's the good news here, but again, it's going to help to expand the wind field. Here's the wind shear forecast. As we go on into Thursday, or late Wednesday into Thursday, we've got those winds, that wind shear kicking in out of the west. It's interacting with the jet stream. It's expanding the broadening wind field, and we're tilting the system as well, right up to landfall in the Tampa Bay area Wednesday night into Thursday. I also want to show you another perspective on a broadening wind field. Here's a look at the wind field right now, pretty close to right now, late tonight into early tomorrow morning. The yellow is all tropical storm force winds. The red is hurricane force. Notice as it gains latitude, interacts with the jet stream, increase of wind shear, the wind field really broadens. And for a good chunk of the day or the night on Wednesday into Thursday, most of the state of Florida will be experiencing tropical storm force winds, at least, with the peak of the winds, the strongest of the winds, coming on in near landfall location, the center of Milton, which would bring well in excess of hurricane force winds, and that moves right over the Florida peninsula. Of course, those winds east and southeast of the center of Milton will be driving onshore, so the storm surge threat is astronomical. As you get into the Tampa Bay area, we're looking at a storm surge from 10 to 15 feet. That stretches down to Sarasota and just north of Port Charlotte. On the other side, on the other coast of Florida, the East Coast, we're also going to have a storm surge threat. After it makes landfall on the West Coast, moves over land, and then reemerges, we'll have the winds blowing onshore, this time on the west and northwest side of the center of Milton. And that will pile up the water from Savannah, Georgia, down to Jacksonville, to Daytona Beach and Cape Canaveral. They could be seeing storm surge up to 6 feet in those locations. So both coasts under the threat here for significant storm surge. Pile on the freshwater flooding from the tropical downpours. We're looking at 6 to 9 inches potentially in Tampa, a foot or more up at Palm Coast, a good chunk of central northern Florida, dealing with a foot, maybe more of rainfall as this storm makes landfall and then eventually exits off to the north and east, not into the southwest Atlantic. What else is going on in the Atlantic? Well, we've got Leslie, that became a hurricane again after weakening to a tropical storm. That stays well out in the Atlantic. Another wave emerging off the coast of Africa, low chances, and another wave here that's actually due east of Florida and the Bahamas that's got a 30% chance of developing. Next name on the list, if any of those tropical waves were to develop, would be Nadine. And then we move on to Oscar, Patty, and Raphael. All right, that's the latest on Milton. We'll join you again tomorrow out ahead of landfall for another update. But until then, if you're in the storm's path, make sure you're heeding evacuation orders and you're preparing for the storm to be a very impactful system as it moves on through. You can find me on social media if you have any questions. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. We'll see you again tomorrow.